Good afternoon. I think you guys are probably some of the more technical side to be in this talk, but this will be covering quite a few ups and downs and really deep and really high level stuff, so it's going to be all over the place, and hopefully there's something you guys can get out of it. So to begin with, this is basically how to do malware analysis to get more intel out of it, and then how to use intel to actually do your malware analysis. So kind of one of the both ways of that realm. The idea is to actually use this information to figure out if you're the victim of a targeted attack versus random attacks on the internet, and then how you can actually detect those and put defenses in place to stop them in the future. So first of all, my background in this, just so I'm just not some guy up here speaking to you, is that I'm a consultant now with the RSA Security Incident Response and Discovery team. Previous to that, I was doing reverse engineering malware analysis for the Department of Defense in the Computer Forensics Laboratory. Been with what we call DC3, the Defense Cybercrime Center, for good over 15 years or so. So a lot of training, forensics, and incident response work to the military and commercial organizations. So on the side, I've also write a blog called Ghetto Forensics, which is open source, bad programming of how to do incident response and forensics work. And if you guys saw Jason Street up here earlier today, he and I worked together on Dissecting the Hack, which we have the sequel coming out maybe this year. We'll see. I'm the one holding that up right now. So to begin with, we put defenses in place. Most of them are going to be very outdated. And I know that just because I've been in the field for so long that everything we see being taught today is the same thing that was being taught 15 years ago. We're just using a brand new tool, or just twisting a little bit to get different results out of it. But the ideas are very much the same. And we emphasize that based on system by system going through our network. We have an attack coming in. Okay, give us a list of all the machines, and we'll go one by one through them, trying to figure out how they got on there and so forth. So there's many organizations who have not moved into a enterprise-wide or network-wide engagement or forensic capability to actually see holistically in a network how attacks are coming in and how they're moving about, either through multiple victims being attacked by the same malware or lateral movement by an attacker crossing back and forth through a network. And we also take that and we then break up our teams badly based on their specialized skill. So we have our forensics guys over here, we have our incident responders over here, we have our malware guys over here, we have our pen test red team guys over here, and not often do they actually communicate and talk to each other and work with each other on the same ideas, in the same cases. The forensics guy will actually work on something, incident response gets a flag, they toss over this guy, says, okay, we're done, you pick it up and do something with it. They find malware, they toss it to the malware guy, we're done, you do something with it at this point. And it's really broken down how we could more effectively do analysis and do defense in our organizations. So when we talk about these skills, especially for the incident response and forensic side, even on this side we break it down into these individual niches, these little domains. Stack analysis for malware, dynamic analysis, network analysis, memory analysis. So looking at malware itself, we have multiple different ways we can attack a single malware sample coming into a network. Stack analysis means not just running strings, but opening up into a tool like IDA Pro, a disassembler, a debugger, a decompiler, and seeing what the code actually is. Not what it's doing on the network, but what it's designed to do, and what is its overall ultimate capabilities when it runs perfectly. Versus dynamic analysis, which tells me what is this doing right now on this machine? What artifacts is it leaving behind, and what can I do about those to track them in the future? Network analysis then is what network packets are being sent, what's the structure of them, who they're communicating out to, what ports are they using, and so forth. This is a known structure, like Ghost malware uses a very known set structure. When you see it, you'll see it all the time. Very few permutations on that. Or is it just regular web HTTP traffic going out that's actually sending out beacon information? And memory analysis is kind of the new player to the field of this sample is very encrypted, it's very obfuscated, it's packed, it's very difficult to work with. When we run it, it's not doing anything that we can see, and it's not really sending data that we can understand. So let's attack memory. Let's actually see if we can get it, after it's unpacked itself and decrypted itself in the memory, pull it down, and then start analyzing it. But the problem is, when you have a large-scale team, these are individual people or individual groups of people inside your team. And very rarely do they even work together just to share what techniques they use as far as looking at samples. So there's still a lot of dispersity there. There's very few people who can actually cover all the bases, which is what we need to try to start moving to. So based on that, instead of doing a skill-based approach, How about more of an indicator-based approach? Instead of saying, I need someone who can do stack analysis on the sample, say, I need someone who can take this sample, there's an encrypted domain name in there somewhere, get that name out for me. Figure out who it's going to beacon to, even without us even running it. So there are multiple ways you can even attack that based on static, dynamic, memory, or network. So instead of saying, I need my static guy to do this, say, I just need you to attack this as many ways as possible and get this data out. And the issue with that, when you have these skills segregated, is people tend and they like to go down these little rabbit holes and spend weeks on a single sample and even single subroutines that end up not even doing anything. So there's a lot of wasted time, a lot of wasted effort, because they're not working in a whole larger team of other people saying, get out of there, do something more efficient with your time. You're wasting your time spinning wheels on that process. So there's a very real danger to having single people on a single scope working by themselves without someone directing them on a larger scale of here's what I need you to get in, get out with this data, move on to the next thing. So a lot of the ideas came around of how do we actually build upon intelligence in malanalysis. And one of the biggest ones that probably picked on in the latest days is the cyber kill chain by Lockheed Martin. And this is the whole idea of taking a years-old Department of Defense terminology. We've always had a logistical cyber kill chain or logistics kill chain. Basically, a chain of events where if an attacker attacks one link in this chain, everything below it is now at risk or has been compromised. So where in this chain can someone attack so that everything below it is compromised from that level on? And what Lockheed Martin did is kind of take this approach that a lot of other companies did, is trying to scout out all the stages of an attack from beginning to end and find out where the defenses and strengths come out in each of these little links of this attack. So overall, the 7 links of the cyber kill chain, which is reconnaissance, weaponization, delivery, exploitation, installation, command control actions, this is probably a good time to tell you that this slide will be made available afterwards, so you don't have to write everything down. But these 7 layers, we can then attack individually as forensics people, as incident response people, as defense blue teamers, to say, what is capable at this layer that I need to be looking for? So instead of having a firewall guy and having an IPS guy, say, okay, I need you to look at this layer and see what you can find out about these particular files being dropped onto our network. If you could focus on that one thing, and then build your teams around the idea of not just a tool guy or a skill guy, but you're a guy who's responsible to make sure that no malware PDFs come into this through email. That's your job. And the idea then is by using this, you go beyond the typical IOCs, your indicators of compromise. That has been the goal of the last few years, but it's not that efficient for what we really need. So we have a large amount of text coming in, and our job is basically sift through millions of events and millions of values to figure out what's actually realistic and what's actually relevant and defend against it. And what IOCs do is take these high-level indicators, such as file MD5s or certain network IP addresses or certain domain names, and say, these are known bad. If you see these before, block them. Well, that's great, but they change all the time. Every time there's a new survey coming out that says we have 28 million new malware samples a day, that's bunk, because it's the same malware with all these permutations on it that change the MD5 value. All they do is count the MD5s, when actually it's just the same malware over and over again. So that's going to break your IOCs. It's the same attacks possibly coming into your network, but because you're looking at it at the wrong indicator level, you're not realizing it's the same thing over and over again. You're treating it as if it's a brand new attack every time, which is bad. So instead of looking at that, if we can move into the intel side of it, which is we know this attack coming in, and we can gauge these different attacks, we can group them together, what can we do to actually determine if this is a targeted person on the other end? Are they using certain tools to generate this actual attack that's compromising our network? And if they are using a tool, open source or not, like Metasploit or their own custom tools, are there particular values they're using on their end that are signatures of the actual attacker? Is there certain values they like to use? Is there a certain encryption key or encryption routine that they like to use? And when you start looking at that level, and you start looking at similarities across all your attacks, you tend to find that, hey, this same encryption key is used with RC4 on these 5 different malware samples that we keep coming in or keep getting affected with. This is most likely a single person or a single group of people who are targeting us right now. And that's one of the biggest issues in the last few years is telling organizations that yes, you are possibly being targeted right now for what you have. Even if there's a year between compromises or months between incidences, it's very possible that is a targeted ongoing campaign against you. It's not just random attacks coming in. So along with that is the idea of campaign identifiers. When you have large-scale attacks where these attack groups are compromising thousands or hundreds of hosts every day, they will put some sort of signature identifier on those attacks, usually a network beacon back, to say, if you beacon back with this date or this initial or this word, then I know you're part of this attack campaign. If you come back with this word, I know you're part of this attack campaign. So it's sort of the idea of Monday's attacks, Tuesday's attacks, Wednesday's attacks, Thursday's attacks. That's how they kind of differentiate things out. So if you see a pattern through that and say, hey, I've got 5 attacks, they're all different campaign IDs, but they're all dates, and they're all on the same date structure. It's like, okay, well, that's obviously an idea of a targeted attack. So pulling this chain out and looking for these things is kind of a more complicated way of going about it. But this is the effort of going beyond IOCs, is going beyond the simple, and to say, what extra step could I take today to really collect data to use it tomorrow? So based on the cyber kill chain, the reconnaissance is basically looking for intelligence gathering. It's the most impossible thing to actually look for. You almost will miss this every single time. And the idea behind that, and I'll speak on the next slide, is that you're looking for the idea of what the attackers are using to attack your network or attack your people. How do they actually find your company and find the people who work for you to know to attack you in the first place? Versus weaponization, which is how they actually exploit into your network. What actual exploit are you putting into an email attachment or so forth? The delivery method, either being an email attack, being a watering hole attack, or a peer-to-peer even, FTP server, compromise your supply chain. These are all different ways of getting into your network. Exploitation, installation, command and control, same basic ideas. Jot the malware, let it run, persist, and then start beaconing out. And then actions. Once they're on your machine and once they're on your network, what do they do next? Do they just sit there? Do they collect from a single box? And when I do a malware analysis on the commercial side, one of the biggest questions is, we have this sample, we have a compromised machine, does it have lateral movement? Can it then move to another box? Or can it move to another network segment? And when we do a full stack analysis, like, no. This particular sample is made just to affect this one box. And by knowing that, they can actually say, okay, well, based on that, we can now defend it this way. And we now need to stop looking for things over here. Kind of helps strengthen their actual instant response. So from ideas of what these different layers are, the themes of the carrier. So if we're looking for the idea of an email attack coming into your network, there's a theme, there's a sort of an idea behind that email that says, here's why you should click on this. So it's either like, you know, we see a lot of Thanksgiving, Turkey Day nightmare, catastrophes and frying your turkey, which actually was a campaign used a few years ago. And it was a very good attack because it came at the right time. It got people's attention. All these fears were coming about deep frying turkeys on your back porch. And that was the attack campaign, was a basic email sent to all the employees of a company saying, watch out, here's the dangers of deep frying turkey, or how to make a safe Thanksgiving turkey meal. Same ideas with Christmas, same ideas with holidays, same ideas with big conferences coming up. If they know you're in a particular energy field or regulated field or whatever field you're in, they will find out what events that your employees go to and then base a theme based around that. So how do they actually get intel on who you are so they can craft a better email or craft a better attack so that you can click on the attachment? Versus the actual weaponization, which is what exploit are they using in, say, the email attachment to actually encode malware into it. I'll talk about that in a little bit later on. Versus delivery, exploitation. Again, this is all basic stuff at this level, just as kind of how it's separated out. So when we talk about reconnaissance, we talk about one of the biggest things we look for is called a decoy. Typically when an email attachment comes in, it's going to be a PDF, it's going to be an RTF, it's going to be a Word document or a spreadsheet, one of these known structures. Now if you run it and nothing happens and it just pops your box and goes away, you kind of know you got popped at that point. something weird is going on, it kind of raises a flag, and you call security and say something really bad happened. I clicked the email attachment, it crashed, and now I see lots of hard drive activity. But if they put a decoy in there of the actual real legitimate document that they just encoded with malware, most people will not report it. Most people won't even notice anything unusual going on in the background because they expected by clicking this, I would see this. They saw that, therefore everything's fine. So by taking the idea of Thanksgiving Day catastrophes, if you found an actual PowerPoint document on the internet with that theme in it, and coded that with your malware and exploit, and gave it to a user, when they pop it and run it, they won't know anything's out of the ordinary. So it's actually really good for them. But it's for you as well, where are they getting their decoys from? Are they actually mining your corporate public website to find documents to encode and send back to your people? Are they going to known websites that your people go to on a regular basis? Which is kind of the idea of watering hole attacks, where they will target restaurants, vacation spots, or whatever near your corporate area that they know your employees are going to on a regular basis. So from the idea here is that we're looking at the actual campaign, and the coloring is a little off due to the Mac. But this is an old sample. This is from Contagio dump. You can download it. The Nuclear Challenges Response in 21st Century Conference. Anything conference related, anything coming up about that. In the government side, we see a lot of, here's your new pay scales for the next coming year. Oh, everyone clicks on that one. Changes to your healthcare coming up. Everyone clicks on those. If it's something that people are worried about and scared about, they will almost definitely click on it and open it up. And one of the tools we use on our end to actually pull this metadata out for this is one that's called ExifTool. It's open source, it's free, which basically runs through any file you give out and says, here's all the little bits of metadata I can pull out of it. So for this one PDF, here's all the different values it pulled out. It's very hard to read up here, but again, the slides are available afterwards. What we can notice upon is the creator and the author and the title and these little individual fields to see if there's any commonalities between that and other attacks. If we have the same creator name on multiple decoys, depending on where they come from, that's probably the result of them using a tool to generate content automatically. They just need to put some value in there. So they just automatically put some default value in, and you keep seeing that over and over again. So there, from that level, before it even gets to your box, if you're scanning it on its way in through an email, you can look for certain metadata to say, the last 4 times we saw something from Arlene Goldberg, it was a malware attack. So the 5th time, don't let anyone in with this metadata in it. Put it into a sandbox, let someone analyze it before you send it to the user. So mining metadata then to say this metadata is indicative of a possible attack coming into this network based on all the previous samples we've seen. And this is all the same data that most malware analysis teams don't pull out to give up to the defense guys or the network people because they don't feel it's important. Now, on the technical level of this, we have, let's say, an RTF document, which is what you kind of see here, that first section there. So rich text format, it's a known Microsoft file format, has many exploits available for it. The one here is a CVE 2010-3333, which is you kind of tell if you look for the word P fragments. Anytime you see P fragments in an RTF, it's bad. It's just really bad. So you have a signature that indicates a CVE of an exploit being used. There's a known attack coming in. And then second part there, we have this bin binary hex data that's actual shellcode. So the actual attack method of getting machine exploited is with the exploit on the first part. Then it delivers the actual payload by use of the shellcode. So there's certain shellcode in there. All you're going to see is numbers and hex values. But when you decode, that's actual assembly code that can actually run something. That itself is usually unique to a person who wrote the exploit or to the tool that they're using to actually weaponize this document file. So this is not usually off-the-shelf standard things. And along with that, there are 4 values there, or sorry, 8 bytes near the end that kind of highlighted, XXXX, YYYY. And the only reason that stands out to me is because it's 4 unique values and 4 unique values in a level. It's what we call basic egg hunting. So when they run a exploit, they throw stuff in memory, they don't know where it's at, so they have to run byte by byte by byte to try to find some landmark to say, here's where my shellcode is, or here's where my malware is in memory. And so typically it's going to be 4 bytes and 4 bytes of something. So when I see something pop out of XXXX, Y, then that tells me, okay, there's a known signature here that the actor put in there or that his tool put in there to say, here are the landmarks you're going to be using for this attack. And most of the times those are shared across multiple campaigns. A few years ago, APT1 was using PDPD for all their things, PDPD. So it was a 4 bytes, but once you knew them and once you start looking for them, they popped up in everything you saw. But the thing is, no one was looking for these. And once you saw that, you can actually, before you even run this file or open up in anything, you just look at it and search for those 4 bytes in a relatively small area of the file size, and it was always there. And you always knew, based on that, this was malware. It was going to do something bad. What it did is take that third section down there and do something with it. Now, third section is just all gobbledygook, which you can see. And it's kind of hard to see from a distance, but what I see is 03, 02, 01, 00, FF, FE, FD, FC, FB. These are values are decrementing 1 byte at a time. Working with encryption enough, you know this is probably a single byte XOR value. So what they do is just XOR the data with a single byte that's decrementing, and once it gets to 0, it goes back to the beginning and starts all over again. And so they'll take this massive 200 kilobyte file, malware, executable, throw it to the bottom of a PDF document, and just use a very simple encoding routine to mask it from detection. But with your visual eye, you could see the encoding routine if you knew to look for it. You can, this is actually a big block of null data, so the routine just kind of, the key just kind of stands out. That, again, is something to say, if you see a file that has decrementing FF to 00 in it, then, okay, that's very indicative of a single byte XOR, either decrementing or incrementing. And then what byte does it begin with? It's not always going from 0 to 1 or FF to 00. It usually starts with some random byte. You think it's random, but it's not really not. They put it into the tool. They have a little tool, they type a number in there. That's the first byte that they use for the encryption routine. If it's the same byte every time you get malware in, then probably one guy using the same tool over and over again to just automate these attacks. And we can learn to look for that and try to pull that byte out and say, here's the data, here's my egg, here's the data that's immediately after the egg, and it looks like if I apply this key, it's always an MZ header, so there's an executable there. It's always the same key. These are like things we pull on to say, here's how we know these are automated or coming from the same tool or actor. And some basic tools out there that we use and cover, just so you have some things you can take home with you, and again, this is going to be available online after the talk, is open source or free tools that you can use at home to kind of look for these information and look for these details inside samples yourselves. And malware samples are very easy to find out there, Contagio dump, VX share, and so forth. So when you look at the level of email attacks, we're looking at email headers. We're looking at the transmission chain of what machines it goes through. We're looking for X tags, X original IP address, which most times are all spoofed. Most times those things are missing. But you're also looking for, is there a certain person in your network who is constantly being attacked? Answer is yes. There's always someone who is continually being targeted over and over again. And all they say is, I don't know why. I don't do anything. Well, there's always a reason why. You just don't know it. And they don't know it themselves either, probably. Finally, Googling for their email address might give you some clues if it's in a paste bin dump somewhere. But there's ideas of where to look at the actual email to see, is any email going to this particular person that has an attachment? Should we just go ahead and just put that in a sandbox somewhere? But it's because that person is just getting stuff from all over the place. We don't trust emails going to that person. And a lot of people have actually taken hold of that and made known fake accounts to say, hey, attack us. Target it to this email account because we want to see what email you're using to attack us with or what malware you're using. So that's another campaign you do yourself, is just create fake data that could be targeted by an outsider and make some really nice backstory to it so they can know it's a real person behind it. And beyond email, if you're looking for just regular watering hole attacks, which is the actual web servers themselves, a lot of times you can see JavaScript code, you can see Java code, you're going to see ASPX, you can see all kinds of different languages come into play, but there's certain things you can look for. So this was a zero-day bug that was identified back in February for Internet Explorer. And a few things that popped out on this are people was like, oh, it's just all random values. And it wasn't. Is, for one, the function name, which is kind of hard to read up there right now, PUYHA3. People's like, oh, that's just a random series of numbers and letters. But it wasn't. That one value was the same across all attacks being used for this watering hole. So you found on one site, and you found the same function name on another site, and another site, and another site. So the idea of you could just look through your user's web browser cache for that particular function name, and you could find if they were the victim of a watering hole attack very easily. Along with that as well is down at the bottom, the actual shockwave flash file that worked in conjunction with this for the payload was tope.swf, T-O-P-E. Again, it looked random, but it was hard-coded. And it was the same value used all the time. So get to the idea that these values may not be randomly generated. They may be just someone clacking on the keyboard, letting the cat walk across it, but then they use it continually over time. So it might be something you might want to put some indicators on, pull it out, and just search on things based on it. And this is a fairly recent one, CV 2014-1761. This came out about 2 months ago. This is a brand new RTF attack. And looking at this, again, lots of junk. It's very hard to read this structure and format. So I kind of highlighted some of that for you. So we have the simple rich text format header to say, okay, this is a rich text format. And there is a certain keyword you can find in there called list override with a number, list override count. And again, we know that's part of the attack. So a simple keyword search to say, if this is an RTF file and it has this list override count with a fairly large number behind it, this is 25, it's probably malware. And below that, we can see at the very bottom, it might be easier if I turn that off, is these /u-5-digit number, /u-5-digit number. And they're taking hex bytes, converting them to integer values, and using that in that place as Unicode. So it's saying this is Unicode integer, and when you convert it back, it's 2 bytes of data. And they use that to encode the shellcode inside this document. So even if you don't understand it to that level, the fact that you have an RTF document and you have a whole series of these /u- numbers, that structure alone is something you can key in on and start searching for to say this is bad. And I don't know if these attacks can come in. I don't know what the shellcode is going to be. I don't know what the payload is going to be. But I know the structure of what it's going to look like when it comes in again. And so we get down to the installation side. And there's a few things here for delivery and exploitation. Virus total, Jotty, URL query. If you have a bad, if no one's ever used URL query, it's awesome. You just throw a website at it. Jason Street's got me on that a few times when he found my site popped once. And it showed up in URL query. Yeah, everyone gets popped. I can say more about that, but I won't. And building YAR and sign search rules. YAR, if you're not using that, you must start using it today. It is a signature basic language to say, look for these known bytes or look for this text in a stream of data. And we'll talk about that at the end of the talk. And we get down to the installation layer. Now, before we got to this point, we had multiple layers to stop an attack from coming in. We had Reconnaissance, which is not really a way to stop it. It's more of telling your people, don't put stupid stuff on the internet. If there's nothing on the internet, no one knows to attack you. So that's your defense at that level. Other than that, there's not much you can do. Weaponization, we can actually look for the exploits. We can look for through AV scanning. We can look for just things that will pop out based on CEV values. And there's lots of tools and software and appliances out there that can do that for you. Delivery, looking for email attachments, looking for watering hole attacks. Again, if we stop at that level, it doesn't go any further. To the exploitation, which is the bad code is on your machine at this moment. You couldn't stop it. It's on here. Now, can you stop it from actually exploiting? And we've actually gotten lots of good forensic exams out of that, where someone says, I clicked on an exploit. Something bad happened. We don't know what happened after that point. And when you look at it, you say, okay, it's this known JavaScript. It runs a shockwave. That shockwave looks for a certain version of Flash or a certain version of Java installed. And your version was not in that list. So therefore, it didn't do anything. Oh, but we're compromised. You're not compromised. You did something bad. You were stupid, you clicked on attachment, but luckily your network administrator had updated your machine to software that was no longer exploitable. And so they were able to stop it at that layer before it can go any further. So still bad, you can still have caught it on those earlier chains, but you caught it on the exploitation chain, which is good enough. Now, if none of those worked, if it got to this point where it's actually running now, and it's installing things onto your machine, here's where forensics usually comes into play on the after effect of looking for files, looking for registry attachments, looking for entrenchment and persistence mechanisms, scheduled jobs, jobs, looking for just all kinds of things that shouldn't be there, and layers of anti-forensics to go along with that. So we all have ways of collecting this data. There's various sandboxes out there. Cuckoo is one of the biggest, probably one of the best out there. It's open source. They have a web base. It's an appliance base you can build yourselves. Lots of web-based ones out there. Personally, I use Noriben, which is a tool I created. Of course, I have to pitch it that way. But it just uses processmon from sysinternals from Microsoft. So Marko Sinovich's tool, it just basically runs on top of that to say, collect data right now on this machine, run your malware, and then tell me at the end what happened. And it filters out all the stuff that's known good. It correlates things and just kind of runs YARA on them, does signatures, and say, here's a report, here's all the stuff that we found, do something with it. Kind of looks like that, which is very impossible to read, I'll give you that. But it tells us, here's all the processes it created by this malware running, here's all the files that were created, either created a new folder, deleted a file, moved a file, copied the file somewhere, and here's the MD5 values of those files as they got moved around the system. And so based on that, and this one is, you see lots of signatures come out. So if you've seen zero access, Trojans go around, here's an example of zero access where there's certain known files and file names and folders. If you ever see them in conjunction with each other, you know it's that one malware. And for this instance, it's zero access, where there's always an @ symbol and a letter N somewhere under the recycle bin for a user, which is bad. Zero access is horrible. So using these tools, or any combination of them, collect the actual files being dropped. And this is typically where people start and stop at, is using these tools to get file hashes out, to get domains out, to get network communications out. They write their IOCs up and then they stop, which is bad. Because now I'm telling you, you need to start way up here and you need to keep going after this to actually collect everything you need for this incident. So for the level of network communications then, just to wrap up on this, installation based, again, this is going to vary depending on the victims you use as well. So there's a lot of cases where depending on the malware, if it does VM detection, it will not run inside a VMware machine. It won't run even on VirtualBox or Joe Sandbox or whatever you throw it at. It may be detecting all those, which is very common of Russian crimeware malware. They can detect lots of things, they try not to run under them. And then there's some cases where they want you to run in a VM environment. They're attacking servers. They want this malware to run on a server, and they know that your environment uses ESXi or comparable VMs. And so to them, they're saying, if you're not running this in a VM, you're not a server, we don't want to attack you, we're going to quit and do nothing. So you have to realize on the back end, is the environment you're running on what they expected you to be running on, and then can you mimic it the best way you can? So any part of dynamic analysis, that's going to come into play. And that's a step that a lot of people will skip over and miss, and have malware that doesn't do anything, and they write it off. To the network level of looking for known things that will pop out to us. We know bad domain names. We could do domain names and do whois on them to find some indicators, and that's what the typical threat intel guys do. We're looking at the more technical side of that, is looking for known URL structures. So the one above, at the top, KYS allow get ASP, name equals get KYS.jpg. This is one that's been known for many years, get KYS, is name was simply called. But it's a known structure, and that structure is always the same across packets. Even though the host name value will be the different, it's going to be your actual host name, and the IP is going to be different, you can have certain strings in there that are always going to be that way. To the second one, this movie.swf, Apple equals a whole bunch of hex values. This was a variant of the Elderwood attacks of last summer or 2 summers ago, where they had hex-encoded, XOR-encoded URLs in the beacon. And what that means is if you take that long series of digits from 88969 all the way to the end of E2, 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 and you convert that to data, and you take that last byte of E2 and XOR the entire thing by that byte, you get a web host. You get a URL that's http://gohere.com. So how can you then look for that? If you see movie.swift come in and you see that question apple, most people just stop there. Well, you know the routine. You know by this sample that the last byte is the XOR key for the whole rest of the string. Write something that can use that. More and more network enterprise solutions are coming out that let you manhandle the traffic and do things with it. RSA, we have a tool called Security Analytics. We have ECAT. We do things that do this way. So does Snort. So does a lot of the other ones out there, which lets you write your own parsers in a language like Lua, which is what we use, to say, well, look for this data. If it exists, do this math on it. And at the end, is it a URL that begins with http://? If so, log that in the database. Don't do anything with it, just log it. At this level, you should just be logging everything that you pull out, because that's one thing no one ever does. But then when you look upon that and say, okay, based on this attack, it sent us to this URL. 2 weeks ago, we had not the same attack, but something kind of similar that sent us to the exact same URL. But we didn't correlate because it was encoded at the time. We didn't know. So again, the idea, get past of just looking at things, play with it, see what else is hidden in there that can actually give you back to more the attacker side. Maybe he's using a front-end service to actually inject the code out there to do the first stage exploitation of your box, just to hand off to his own personal servers on the back end, which are always going to be the same across campaigns. And then the very bottom one there, basically if you see any byte sequence of 256 bytes of random data continually being sent across a network, it's poison ivy. It's almost always poison ivy. But you don't know until you see it. And he's like, oh, this is encryption. It's got to be this. Well, it is encryption. It's because in there. It's almost impossible to do in your eyes. It's almost impossible to do by hand. But there's encryption in there. But if you just look for that regular 256 bytes, you've got something to go off of. And if you want more on that, Google the Deep End Research Library of Malware Traffic Patterns, which is a great Google document that says, here's an APT style, or here's a crime family, here's the malware it uses, and here's what the traffic is going to look like on your network. It's not fully encompassing, but it's got a great level of data you can actually start with and do something with. So Deep End Research Library of Malware Patterns. So at this point, we have not stopped the malware. It's running. It's actually beaconing out on this network. All right, now we're just getting really bad. So how can we detect it on the wire? How can we start detecting that there's C2 communications going on and do something about that? So typical tools come into play of actually Wireshark, looking at the traffic. The best way, I think, is actually using the rat itself, using the Trojan against itself. If you know it's poison ivy, then set up your own fake poison ivy server and see if it connects to it. You have to know the password. You have to do some reversing to get that. But once you have that, it's like, oh, it's just poison ivy. We're done. And with poison ivy, you can say, okay, tell me everything you have about this client. And it'll just drop the configuration details and say, oh, well, the malware told me that when I infect the machine, I must do this, 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 and this, and use this identifier and this mutex and this. Okay, use your Trojan client, your server, tell the client, give me all that data, drop to a database, move on to the next guy. And then when you have things in the database, start correlating. It's like, okay, we have a lot of poison ivy attacks coming in over the last few months. And they all have these same values here and here and here. These change up here. These values are all the same. What can that tell us about the attacks coming in? Is that something we can actually detect now using signatures? Can we do something to look for those? That's the train of reasoning to get into. Unfortunately, the more custom rats that come out, you typically write your own servers at that point, using Python, Perl, what have you. It's basically saying, reverse the network structure, write your own server that can communicate with it, see if they connect, and then you know it's this Trojan. And worst case, you don't know what this Trojan is, throw it against every Trojan server you have until it clicks. And there's a lot of shops that actually do that same process. It works. But if you have a layer where you don't need to run the malware at all, what if we can detect everything we need to know about this malware without actually running it? And that's where you get to the level of configuration dumpers. So there's actual hard-coded data within the malware that says beacon to this domain using this port and send this data with it. And it's stored in the malware. It's usually encoded or encrypted in some format. But if you knew the encryption routine and you knew where that data is being stored at, you could just dump it. You could just grab it out of the executable directly. You don't have to run the malware in a sandbox. And that's the next evolution of where we're going, is doing reverse engineering, doing stack analysis, dynamic analysis, to determine there's configuration data inside this malware. Here's what it looks like. Here's how it decodes. If we pull this out, we're done. Because from this, in this example of a JRAT, Java rat that came out last year, here's a port number, here is a campaign ID, here's a domain name it's going to beacon out to. Here's everything we need to know about what this malware will do. So just drop into a database and move on to the next sample. There's no need to do additional reverse engineering or malware analysis at this level. So what if it is encrypted? I mean, and this is a good example where the creator of JRAT used DES encryption, and then Symantec released a public write-up on the malware. And the guy's public. He's on Hack Forum. He's like, this is a joke. The next day, he ruined the version, uses AES encryption. So it just broke all the signatures, but it still worked. So then the next week, he's actually using a new one now. I haven't looked into it. But it's the same basic data on the back end. He's just changing encryption routine. Well, you're like, well, crap. Now we have to redo and reverse the entire sample all over again to figure it out. No, you don't. That's where memory analysis comes into play. If it's using the same structure on the back end, regardless of the encryption routine being used, we don't care. Because at some point in time, it has to decrypt that data and put it in the memory, right? So just attack memory. Run it, pause your VM, use volatility, look at the actual vmem file from your VM appliance, and look for the structure. So for this example, it had a structure of IP equals and the IP name, but it used the word split. So split, 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 all the way through each value. And that's for it to tell what to split on. So knowing that, you can actually write a simple YARA rule, throw it into volatility, and say, show me anywhere where we see the word split and IPs and all these different values. And it'll dump it out for you. So I took that to another layer and wrote a tool, a plugin for volatility to kind of do the same thing for this family. So on my blog post, I have the code for it if you're interested in it. But it's basically writing a single YARA scan for a known memory signature from encrypted malware, looking for it, and then dumping it out. And so you run this, and it's going to look through and say, okay, this is a Java rat. I'm going to look through all the instances of Java running in memory. I found a hit. It's going to drop everything out for you. And that's what this is basically doing for us. So again, we don't need to know the encryption at that point. If we need to get this thing out in a quick, we need to figure out what it is in a hurry without having to redo all the encryption routines and analysis. It's possible to just do that by just bypassing it all, going straight for the memory on the back end. Same way we do unpacked executables. If there's encryption involved, it's got to be decrypted somewhere. So attack where it's decrypted at. And then the typical stuff or action stuff we look for is mimikatz, PW dump, the ideas of actually grabbing hashes, grabbing passwords, doing keylogs, and then looking for lateral movement back and forth across the network. Same basic stuff there. You guys should be aware of this. I want to skip ahead, though, to these indicators that are coming up, because we only got about 7 minutes left. So you have all these indicators. What do you do with them? Put them in a database. It's very simple. And I say that because there's a lot of shops out there who still use indicators in email. That's it. They shoot emails back and forth to each other, and when they think something's come up again, they'll just search their Outlook and see if they ever saw it before. You don't have to raise your hand, but I'm sure some of you in this room do that as well. It happens. Crits is MITRE's, I can't remember what it stands for, but it's a threat intel search database where you throw your malware in it, it pulls out the metadata, it lets you correlate, make graphs, and do all kinds of funny, weird things with data. And they just made it open source last week. They just put it out in the public. So look for crits, play with it. It's awesome. It's made just for this type of work, where you actually pull the indicators out there, you throw your extra data you found into it, and then you start correlating based on that. And the idea is you do your analysis once, never again. If you need to do a deep dive, do that deep dive once. get everything you need out of it, and then reuse that over and over again until it stops working. So how do we reuse this? And these are the different structures out there for us writing rules and signatures. Probably the most industry standard right now is YARA. Can't remember what it stands for, it's a acronym for something. But you look for strings of data. So you say, okay, for this rule, we keep getting encrypted DES malware coming in. Here's the passwords we've seen. Here's a byte pattern for DES tables that we know is always going to be there if you use DES encryption. And you say, if this table exists and any of these passwords show up in that data stream, then it's going to be one of these targeted attacks. Same basic idea. You take data, you look at the stream of data for it, and say, do these exist, or a combination of them exist in any way? If so, then it's probably this malware. And the problem is a lot of people write YARA's rules on strings, just regular text AC, which is bad. It works, but you have to assume at some level strings will be encrypted, and you may never see them ever again, or they'll just be changed. So if you're really good at malware analysis, what you're actually going to be looking for is unique strings or math, encryption routines, encoding routines, various memory size allocations that are just odd. And typically that's a signature of the attackers, like this is how I program. This is the way I do it. I'm going to do it the same way every time. Whereas if you get to a different person who's a programmer, they're going to have a completely different method of actually how to write the code. So if you can actually find these things out, write signatures on it, but at the same time, don't write a single signature, write 20 of them for the same sample. Here's a network, here's the file structure, here's the encrypted data, here's your encoding routine. And then for the next sample that comes in, hey, all 10 hit, all 10 hit, all 10 hit, 5 hit, 3 hit, 1 hit. Okay, now there's variance. They're changing the routines on the back end. What did they change? Why did they change it? Do they know that we're actually responding to their attacks and now they're using different encryption routines? So don't just write a single rule for everything. Spread it out, use a multivariate approach, and you can actually track as they make changes to the malware during attacks. And say, wow, they actually caught us defending against that, and now they changed it up to do something else. Let's go back in, deep dive, get that new value out, and write a new signature for it. On the intelligence side, now we've got 5 minutes left, so on the intelligence side of what we can actually do with this data, they're all just raw data at this point. At this point, there's really not much you can do with it. It's how you link and push things together. So typically, we deal with edges in a graphing world, where a single point of entry, this is a file, this is an IP address, this is a domain name, these are items. That's typically what we look at right now. This is what IRCs are based off. What we don't look at is the activity between those events. We don't say, well, typically right now we say, okay, file 1 is a dropper, file 2 is a driver, here are the MD5 values of each. But what we're not looking for and what we're not correlating on is that file 2 is encoded in a certain routine inside file 1. It's a binary resource using this XOR key. It's like, oh, well, that same pattern is being used over and over again over on this level. And over on this level, we're seeing the same thing with a different XOR key. But when you start looking at the actual actions being taken between the indicators, you get a lot more of the picture and a lot more fun things start popping out at you. So for example, to close this up, is an attack here coming in. We have an email-based delivery attack, badguy@hotmail.com. Email contains an attachment that has a CVE 2014-1761 attachment in it, which is a bad RTF. That RTF had shellcode. The shellcode XOR decoded with a XOR key of hex 48. It goes out to malware1.com, pulls down something, drops it to your system as all users profile Adobe update.exe. Okay, so at this point we have, in the old IRC world, we have an email, we have an attachment, and then we have a file that's being dropped. We're looking beyond that though for the XOR keys, we're looking for the shellcode that comes up. This drops a known Trojan, XI we'll call it, which does a connectivity check out to Google, and when it works, it then starts sending encrypted beacons out to this really bad domain name. All right? So there's an attack. We know that attack. A week later, different attack comes in. Watering hole attack from this RV camping site. And it uses a Java drive-by, which has kind of a similar thing. It goes to a different malware site. It's using an XOR key of 2E to download and decode the data. But it drops a file in the same location as the previous one, but we don't know what it is. It's not hitting MD5s, it's not hitting strings. Nothing about this executable is like the one we saw before. And most people was like, okay, it's brand new. It's some similarities about where it's at, but other than that, it's brand new. We say, no, based on this, it's doing the same connectivity check, and it's seeing the same style of encrypted beacon to the same attacker's site, then you can actually correlate on that to say, these are different, but there's a layer to this attack that's identical between the two of them. Then you start thinking, okay, well, attacks are not just single attacks, they're multi-staged. So this first stage was different from this first stage. But when it got to the second and third stage, they were identical. So the same guy in the back end who's selling out, he's actually renting services from other people, saying, I need you to get this on the box somehow. I need you to get this on the box somehow. However you can get on that box, get on that box. But on the very back end, it's the same guy. It's the same style attack. It's the same network defense you can put in play. One rule to block it, regardless of how it initially came in to play. So, to close out, what can we do? What can we take away from this? First of all, standardize on a simple signature format. It's going to be based on who's in your team and what you deal with. And for the last 2 minutes of my talk, as I see Jake back there, YARA, indicators of compromise, sticks, pick one, use it, learn it, use it all the time, get it into your tools. Write signatures all the time, over and over and over, as many as you can, so that you can track these variations. If you want to automate that, there's a great tool out there that just came out about 3 weeks ago called Cuckoo Sticks, which takes a sandbox, automatically creates sticks output. You can do something with that. Use virus total, use intelligence, take your YARA signatures, throw up on the site, and get feeds. Hey, a new one just got uploaded, matches what you just sent us. But then also acknowledge there's weaknesses in this overall structure. There's weaknesses in how we lay out defenses in the cyber kill chain, which is we focus on the initial level of entry into this network. We focus on how the attack comes in, but we're not looking at the holistic level of if they come in this level and it stops, we're going to come in here from a different layer and just pick up on the way down. And then once they get in there, they're going to come in with a different layer and start doing lateral movement on this end. That doesn't fit into this model that's been projected into the industry of how you must work in things. So realize that. If you have management that's like, you will do it this way, it's like it doesn't fit. This has to be a living or growing way of actually doing incident analysis. And that means growing and changing your structure as it goes with it. And with that, I'll take questions, and I'm getting a sign. But thank you, and if you have any questions, you can come up and ask me.